Core definitions: Orcs versus Goblins versus Uruk-hai.
In Tolkien's Legendarium, Orc is the base race created through Morgoth's corruption of early elves. He could not create life, so he twisted what already existed. After Morgoth's imprisonment, Orcs multiplied for millennia, first appearing in Beleriand in the Years of the Trees and later serving Sauron throughout the Second and Third Ages. This establishes one species-level baseline. All later labels describe kinds or breeds within the greater orc kind. Goblin is not a separate species in Tolkien's texts. It is simply another word for orc. Film adaptations often portray goblins as smaller, misty mountain dwellers, but in the books, the terms are interchangeable. Any perceived size or habitat difference comes from adaptation choices, not from Tolkien's terminology. Uruk-hai names a later, superior breed of orcs. The term combines Black speech Uruk, orc, and hai, folk people, literally orc folk. Sauron first bred Uruks in the late Third Age, and Saruman later bred his own. They differ functionally from ordinary orcs by enduring sunlight without weakening, and by being faster, stronger, larger, and generally more disciplined. Their exact making is undisclosed, with Treebeard speculating about dark arts or mixing with men, but the texts confirm their battlefield advantages and independent development under both Sauron and Saruman.
Physical characteristics.
Ordinary orcs were generally shorter and more crooked than men. They were described with long arms, fanged mouths, and sallow or dark skin. Their stature varied depending on the region and breed. Many were bow-legged or hunched, showing the deformity of Morgoth's corruption. While dangerous in numbers, most ordinary orcs were physically weaker than men. The term goblin, as used in The Hobbit, referred to these same creatures. The goblins of the Misty Mountains were somewhat smaller on average, but this difference was not a separate biological category, just a local variation. Their appearance was the same: sharp teeth, misshapen limbs, and a generally twisted form. The Uruk-hai, by contrast, were much larger and straighter-limbed. They could match or exceed the height of men, and bore more muscular builds. They were bred to be stronger and faster than ordinary orcs. They carried themselves upright, unlike their hunched kin, which gave them a commanding presence on the battlefield. Their physical superiority was deliberate, designed to overcome the weaknesses of lesser orcs.
Weaknesses and strengths.
Ordinary orcs were strongest at night. Sunlight weakened them both physically and mentally, making them less effective in open battle during the day. They also had a tendency to quarrel among themselves, showing little discipline or loyalty beyond fear of their masters. This lack of unity was one of their greatest weaknesses, often leading to disorder in their ranks. Goblins, being the same as orcs, shared these weaknesses. In The Hobbit, the goblins of the Misty Mountains are shown avoiding sunlight, thriving in their underground tunnels. Their strength lay in numbers, ambush tactics, and their skill with underground forges and machinery, but they were not suited for prolonged fights in daylight. The Uruk-hai did not suffer from the same vulnerability. They could fight under the sun without hindrance, making them far more effective for long campaigns and open warfare. They also displayed greater discipline, capable of marching quickly over long distances without breaking formation. This combination of endurance, strength, and order made them the elite shock troops of both Sauron and Saruman, feared by men and elves alike.
Origins and breeding.
The first orcs originated in the First Age through the corruption of captured elves. Morgoth could not create life on his own, so he twisted living beings into a form of mockery. These early orcs spread across Middle-earth, multiplying naturally over time and forming many subgroups. After Morgoth's defeat, Sauron continued to breed and command them throughout the Second and Third Ages. Goblins, mentioned extensively in The Hobbit, were simply one of these orc populations, specifically those inhabiting the Misty Mountains. Their presence in mines, tunnels, and mountain halls led to their being described with a distinct name, but their origin was the same as all other orcs, descendants of the corrupted elves, first taken by Morgoth. The Uruk-hai appeared much later. Sauron began breeding them in Mordor during the late Third Age to overcome the weaknesses of ordinary orcs, particularly their inability to fight under sunlight. Saruman later developed his own strain of Uruks in Isengard, who proved even more disciplined. Treebeard speculated that Saruman may have crossed orcs with men to create them, but Tolkien never confirmed this explicitly. What is certain is that Uruk-hai were stronger, larger, and more resistant than earlier orc breeds, representing the peak of dark breeding practices.
Language and names.
The word orc comes from the Elvish tongue Sindarin, derived from the older Quenya term Urko or Orko, meaning a bogey or demon. Elves used it to describe these corrupted beings, and it carried a sense of revulsion. In Westron, the common speech of Middle-earth, orcs were often called orc. The word goblin was primarily used in The Hobbit. Tolkien employed it as an English translation of orc for a younger audience. Within the legendarium, goblin holds no separate linguistic origin. It is interchangeable with orc. The distinction between the two is therefore one of presentation rather than language. The term Uruk-hai comes from black speech, the tongue devised by Sauron. Uruk means orc, while hai means folk or people. Together, it translates as orc folk, or the people of the orcs. This name reflected their role as a higher breed within orc kind. They often referred to themselves simply as Uruks, emphasizing their superiority over lesser orcs.
Culture and behavior.
Ordinary orcs lived in brutal, hierarchical societies ruled by fear and violence. Stronger captains dominated weaker ones, and betrayal was common. They had no loyalty beyond survival and the command of their masters. Orcs were skilled in tunneling, mining, and crude craftsmanship, creating weapons and armor in vast numbers, though always of rough make, compared to the works of elves or dwarves. Goblins of the Misty Mountains displayed these same traits. In The Hobbit, they were shown as inventive with machinery, building contraptions like engines and torture devices. They relied heavily on ambushes and swarm tactics, preferring to overwhelm enemies through numbers rather than skill or bravery. Their culture was built around the darkness of their mountain halls, where cruelty and cunning took precedence over strength. The Uruk-hai demonstrated a marked difference in behavior. They were more disciplined, often keeping order even in large marching companies. Unlike lesser orcs, they could maintain formation, endure long campaigns, and follow commands with greater reliability. While still ruthless and violent, their behavior was shaped into a more organized military structure, reflecting the designs of Sauron and Saruman. This made them far more dangerous as a coordinated fighting force.
Role in warfare.
Ordinary orcs formed the bulk of Morgoth's and later Sauron's armies. They were numerous, expendable, and used as foot soldiers in sieges and massed battles. Their lack of discipline limited their effectiveness, but in overwhelming numbers they could devastate unprepared foes. They also served as scouts, raiders, and garrisons in occupied lands. Goblins, being mountain-dwelling orcs, specialized in ambush warfare. In The Hobbit, they attacked travelers in the Misty Mountains and relied on their knowledge of caves and tunnels to trap enemies. Their main role was harassment rather than open battle, though they could muster large hosts when united under strong leaders, as seen in the Battle of the Five Armies. The Uruk-hai were designed specifically for open war. They marched in daylight, carried stronger weapons, and could engage directly with the armies of men and elves. Saruman's Uruks, in particular, demonstrated organized battlefield tactics, as seen when they captured Merry and Pippin and endured relentless pursuit across Rohan. In sieges, assaults, and prolonged campaigns, they proved far more capable than ordinary orcs, serving as elite shock troops at the forefront of major conflicts.
Representation in text and adaptations.
In Tolkien's writings, the terms orc and goblin are interchangeable. The Hobbit consistently uses goblin, while The Lord of the Rings primarily uses orc. Tolkien himself explained that goblin was a more familiar English word he employed for younger readers, but both referred to the same beings. In adaptations, particularly films and games, goblins are often portrayed as a smaller, weaker subspecies of orc, usually confined to caves or mountains. This is not strictly Tolkien's distinction, but an interpretive choice by later creators to emphasize variety in the armies of darkness. The Uruk-hai are consistently shown as a distinct and more dangerous breed. In Peter Jackson's films, Saruman's Uruks are depicted as being bred in pits beneath Isengard, emerging fully armed and armored. This visual dramatization highlights their unnatural origins and their superiority over lesser orcs, though the exact breeding process is left ambiguous, as it is in the books.
Key distinctions summarized.
Orcs are the corrupted descendants of elves, forming the base race. They were numerous, physically deformed, and weakened under sunlight. Their strength came from overwhelming numbers, but they lacked discipline and unity. Goblins are simply orcs by another name, with no biological or cultural difference. The label goblin mainly appears in The Hobbit to describe misty mountain orcs, but in Tolkien's Legendarium, the two terms are interchangeable. Uruk-hai are a superior breed of orcs, first developed by Sauron and later by Saruman. They were taller, stronger, disciplined, and unaffected by sunlight. This made them more capable of organized warfare and long campaigns, distinguishing them from ordinary orcs and goblins.